So I've got these to release lines, and they would not work. They're too thick. The plastic's too thick on them to go in there. Now I'm sure that they make a tool to remove them. What I did is I pulled the plastic caps off, and there's these little clips, and that's what you have to release. So what I did, I took a very small screwdriver. This one, actually, the tip was broken, so I ground it down and made it really thin, and I was able to get in there and pop those clips off. So I just popped them both off. So now those lines should pop out of there. I'm gonna leave them sitting in there until I'm kind of ready to get the transmission coming out of there. There's no reason to pull them off right now. I might have to when I need to get to the bolt right there, but for right now I'm gonna leave them just sitting in there ready to pull out. There's nothing holding them in there except for just, you know, being stuck in there. So that way, right when I'm ready to pull it out, pull the transmission out, I can pull that out, and because fluid's gonna drop. So I'm trying to keep my area here clean where I'm working as long as possible. So now let's start getting some of these bolts up here. We'll probably go ahead and get that one right there undone, and we'll pull the transmission dipstick tube out from the top. Okay, so I got the transmission dipstick up out of the transmission, but it's kind of stuck. There's not much room up top to clear it, and so we're gonna just leave it right there for right now. We got it out of the way for this bolt. I think once we get the transmission moving, that'll kind of free it up a little bit, and we can go from there. So, and get it out. What we've got now is we're going to start taking some of these bolts out, and we need to try to get a long extension up in there. Let's see if we can see the top one. I can't really see it. It's up in there somewhere. It's actually, it's gonna be right there. That might be it. We can get a long extension and see if we can get some of these out of here. One thing I'll note, these Harbor Freight ratchet wrenches with swivel head, and they're kind of short. These are very nice, and I've put a lot of torque through them. They're a little big in the head right here, more so than a, you know, like a gear wrench. Maybe not much more, but they seem to be made well, and they are really handy. You can really get these in tight spots, and you know, because they're got the flex head, and it holds good too. You know, it's not like it's a flimsy head. You know, it's got a nice fit where it'll stay kind of where you put it. They're just really handy for getting in tight spots. You know, like say right here, I used it to get that nut off, and I was able to bend it at a crazy angle like that. I had it bent like that to get that nut off. And, you know, a standard wrench is not going to be at that much of an angle, so just nice to have. Got a few of them, or I got a set of them. Yeah, they're a little bulky to get in here for stuff like this, but they work for this other stuff. So let me get probably a 3/8 with a bunch of 3/8 drive with a bunch of extensions, and see if I can get up in there extensions and a wiggle joint and get these off. Alright, we've got 2 bolts here holding it, and 2 bottom ones and that one. So that's what's holding the transmission on. Plus it's still sitting on the little dowel pins. The one that's way up, the center bolt, you know, on these LS motors, you have a center bolt that the old style didn't have. That one was the hardest one to get to, and I ended up lowering transmission until we just barely touched the cross member, just so I can get my hand up in there. And I got all these bolts out actually, except for one of them over there. I used that ratchet wrench, but the rest of them I was able to use the impact wrench with a wiggle joint and a deep socket. So it wasn't too bad, really. There's one bolt over here. I'm going to call this, alright, so if you call this the first bolt on this side, second, third, the fourth bolt is not there. I'm not sure if they've had this transmission out before or what, but, I mean, surely it came with that bolt in it, but that bolt's not there, and I don't see really any signs that this thing has been out before. I guess once we get it out, maybe we can see a marking on the converter where, you know, tell maybe if the converter's been rebuilt. But I didn't think this transmission had ever been rebuilt or out of here. Let's see if we can tell if that, can't really tell if that bolt's been out before or not. Let's see about this one. I would say that bolt there, it's hard to tell. Anyway, so let's get this thing out of here. Let me go get my transmission jack. Once we get the transmission jack under here, we'll take this jack out and we can undo these last 3 bolts, and we're going to have to wiggle it and maybe even get a pry bar and get it off the dowel pins. And let's see, yep, that should be fine. I was making sure this side cover didn't have a bolt that went into the transmission, but it doesn't. And let's check this side where the starter is. That should be okay as well. Yeah, see that, all that oil? We need to see if that's coming from the oil pan, or the rear main seal. We're definitely going to put a new rear main seal when we get the transmission out, but we'll have to see if we need to do the oil pan as well. Alright, my transmission jack is nothing fancy. It is the cheap Harbor Freight one. I've done quite a few transmissions with it, and I don't do transmissions very often, but I've had this quite a while, and it has definitely come in handy. I've used it on 4-wheel drive vehicles with transfer cases, and what I do on those is I put this under the transmission, and I've done 2 or 3 in all Chevys, older Chevys, 2 I guess. Yeah, 2. I've done 2 of those, and then and one of them was with the big 203 cast iron transfer case. But I left the transmission cross member in place when I pulled those out, and put a jack. The transmission cross member on those runs kind of under the transfer case in the transmission, and put a jack right there on it, and to support the weight of the transfer case, and had this on holding the weight of the transmission, just to kind of balance things out, and it worked well. So we've got this on it, we've got it strapped down, it's got this ratchet strap on it, got it strapped down tight. Now I'm going to go ahead and undo those 3 bolts and wiggle the oil cooler lines out, and then I'm going to grab hold of the tail shaft of the transmission and wiggle it back and forth and get it off, get it to release from the dowel pins in the block. Alright, so wiggled the transmission and it popped off the dowel pins. Now that it's off, and slid back just a little bit, I'm going to get in here and undo the torque converter bolts in our little gap that we now have. And so I'll probably have to get a screwdriver and hold the flywheel because they're not wanting to break loose. I don't think I can get this ratchet in there. Nope, I have to go get a boxed end. I cannot get, it's too thick. I'm gonna go get a skinny boxed in wrench and I'll get in there, and then I'll get a big screwdriver that I can hold the flywheel, probably stick it up through here, wedge it, and we'll get the torque converter bolts out. Alright, well, I ended up having to pull the starter off. I was trying to do it without it. I should have went ahead and just pulled it off because I knew I was going to have to pull it off to put it back in. Normally, at least going back in, you would... oh, y'all look dirty. Normally going back in, you would, you know, push the transmission up, then push the torque converter, you know, push the transmission seated all the way up, because you don't want the transmission or the torque converter to drop out of its slot in the pump. And so you're going to want to put the transmission all the way up against the back of the engine, the bell housing against the back of the engine before you draw the torque converter up, because you don't want to pull that out of its spot. Out of the pump. You don't want to pull the converter out of the pump. But coming off, you can pull it away from the bell housing just a little bit, and that gives you room to get in here. And I get a wrench on the other bolts and use that to turn the flywheel around. It's so much easier than trying to get like a little screwdriver in this little hole or anything, or, you know, I guess you could. Well, you can't even bump the starter because you can't get to, you need to get to the bolts right here. So to me, removing it, pulling it away from the engine just a little bit, just to get that little bit of room to get in there, it makes it a whole lot easier. It doesn't really matter coming off, you know, if you do that first. And then going back, I'm just going to line up one bolt here, and we'll start that one torque converter bolt. We won't tighten it, and then we'll just have to slowly from in here turn the flywheel. So just a little tip, and I was able to get a wrench, get this wrench right here, this ratchet, long ratchet. Broke the bolts loose with it, and then got on with the wiggle joint and the impact, and came through there and got them the rest of the way out. So we're just about ready to pull it off. I forgot this electrical connection, unplugged it, and then we've got the vent right here. I need to get a pair of pliers, undo that clamp, and pull this vent line off, and we should be ready to come out. Alright, so this is where a lift would be nice. My jack stands are all the way up. I should invest in some taller jack stands. Well, they could go maybe 1 or 2 clicks. I don't like going all the way up. And that's as high as my jack would go without, well, I might go a little higher. I don't know. We'd have to go a lot higher though to get this transmission out on the jack. We'd have to go another 8 inches or so. So, and this is actually a decent height to work on up under here, because you get any higher and your arms get a little short reaching stuff up top. So there's enough room to scoot around underneath easily and still be able to work. So what we're going to do now is we're going to slide the transmission off probably onto a piece of board and then see if it will clear to come out. If it still doesn't clear to come out, we will remove the bell housing off the transmission, and it should definitely clear there. And even if I pull the bell housing off right now, it still would not clear to pull it out. So no way we can leave it on the jack. And we are end up dumping fluid. I would have drained the fluid, but the head on the drain is stripped. So unstrap the transmission. And I will slide it over onto a board. It's out. I just push it over onto a piece of cardboard. I took the bell housing off, the torque converter too, and it slid out. So now it's ready to go. Ready to. I'm not going to tear into it today. I've got quite a few other things to do, and I want to be able to dedicate, you know, a lot of time to, once I open that thing up, you know, tearing down into it. And I need to do some cleaning, clean off workbench and get a good clean area to do it. So I'm gonna leave it together for now. I'm gonna grab one of these dollies like that, car dollies, and we're gonna get it over onto one of those, and we'll use that to kind of maneuver it around. All right, now it's mobile. I'm gonna roll it into the shop. I'll probably stick the torque converter back on it. I'll leave the bell housing off, and you can see this one is rounded off on the inside. I got some vice grips on it and got it freed up, got it broke loose, and this one is fine. We'll probably replace this bolt. I'll find another bolt to put in here, and shoot, I may replace both of them, and not put a star bit, put a regular hex head bolt in here, and both of those. So they're loosened up, and I just wanted to make sure I could get that off. So we are in good shape. And this is where we're going to quit for today. So thanks for watching.